Oh, the humanity. One could not write this, for they would not believe you. Maximilian Verstappen embroiled in now what feels like the polemic of polemics as at the Spanish Grand Prix. It was chaos. It was circumstances. Everybody's got something to say. We're going to discuss it over the next 10 minutes or less. Let's go through what people have said in the first instance, and then we'll chime in. The other protagonist in one of the incidents, lest we forget, there were two, weren't there? There was Charles Leclerc, and so too there was George Russell on the straight, and so too in the third instance there was the incident for which Maximilian Verstappen has ultimately received a 10-second penalty, demoting the full soon-to-be 5-time champion down to P10. Oh, the humanity. The difference now between Max and Oscar Piastri in the lead of the drivers' standing is now as near as makes no difference. 2 race victories, 49 points. Oh, the humanity. How have we gotten here, chat? And again, Red Bull et al. Will be having conversations, not in the least because one Gianpiero Lambiase, normally so on the point in his communication with his little brother, Maximilian Verstappen, has some part to play in this as far as its culpability. Of course, in the first instance, Anthony Davidson talks about Charles Leclerc's what he had to do with this, because remember they were both travelling alongside the straights, and Max Verstappen said, "What, Charles Leclerc hit me?" To which Max Verstappen, they said, "What are you talking about? Charles Leclerc was travelling straight." "Not so," says Anthony Davidson. "When you look at it and you analyse it frame by frame, or almost, you draw parallel lines on the graphic. You can see that if anybody moved, encroached upon anybody else's space, it was the Monegasque on Maximilian Verstappen." So on the first case, innocent as charged for Maximilian Verstappen, guilty as charged for Charles. Charles did one of these. Now it's ever so slight, but if there's anybody to blame, of course it's a racing incident and the stewards won't look at it again. But in the first instance of 3, if there's anybody to blame per the British bias internationally syndicated Sky F1 podcast, then you've got to give that to Charles Leclerc. Innocent in the first case for Maximilian Verstappen. Then into turn 1. On the back of the Charles Leclerc incident, you have George Russell going up the inside. This feels and smells to me a lot like Silverstone 2021. And again, if you're gonna talk culpability, there's 3 things that the overtaker needs to do. In the first instance, George Russell needs to be alongside Maximilian Verstappen. To be precise, his front axle needs to be at the very least at the rear view, the wing mirrors of the defender. Tick for George Russell, perfect. He needs to keep it within the white lines, track limits, tick. But so too does George Russell need to keep this thing under control. And the reason why I compare it to 2021 Silverstone is because George Russell mid-corner suffers from the dirty air of Charles Leclerc in front of him and has a cheeky understeer instance, steers directly into Maximilian Verstappen. So in the second instance, guilty as charged for George Russell. Max has nothing to do with this here. He's an innocent party, a bystander therefore, which is why it's even more confusing that GP after that comes over the radio, normally so brilliant and apropos in his communication to Max Verstappen, his little brother, some say, comes over the radio and says, "Max, could you please give back that position to George?" What? What are you doing? To which Nico Rosberg, legendary champion in 2016, says, "No, what are you doing?" The whole world, Max Verstappen's and naysayers alike, says, why are you giving that back to George? Lest we forget that the rules have changed. I will reiterate for the avoidance of doubt. The attacker, as at June 2025, needs to do 3 things to be compliant within the rules. Be at the very least, as far as your front axle, alongside the wing mirrors of the defender in the first instance. In the second instance, need to keep it within track limits between the white lines. Keep it on the island, on the black stuff. And in the third instance, George ticks those first 2. In the third instance, what George needs to do is keep the car under control at all times throughout the move. 2 of 3 of those George ticked. The third, keeping it under control, it was Sir Lewis Hamilton 2021 Silverstone all over again. So again, in the first 2 instances, Max Verstappen, innocent. Do you know what I mean? Case closed. There is no case to be had there as far as Maximilian Verstappen. And that's why the intervention of Red Bull and GP in that instance, in the dying embers of that race, where Maximilian Verstappen is already feeling like the perfect victim. The F1 gods giveth and they taketh away. He'd driven brilliantly. Most people said he was driver of the day throughout. And again, he gets sabotaged, but this is racing. It happens. Sometimes you will do a 3-stopper and then fall foul at the final hurdle when they bring out a safety car. And the only tyres that you've got left are white labelled hard compound tyres. Meanwhile, the rest of you, the two bods in front of you in Lando and Oscar in the papaya coloured car, they have 3-lap old soft compound tyres. Well, you can't live with them. This is Abu Dhabi 21 all over again, but Uno reversed this time. And then the two bods behind you in George and Charles, they also have 3 and 4 lap old soft compound tyres, and you only have fresh hards. Why? Well, because you did 3 stops. As soon as you're going to do a 3-stopper, if there's a safety car, that's always going to happen. Sadly, Maximilian Verstappen is now back against the wall, feeling aggrieved, as if the racing gods, do you know what I mean, have taken their vengeance out upon Maximilian Verstappen. So he's in the helmet fuming, and then GP comes over the radio and says, give back that place. To which Max Verstappen rages, says, what are you talking about, GP? The dude just crashed into me. Give back the position for what, mate? I'm not giving that position back. And then you get the instance that everybody's talking about. And I say this because this is a massive causation part. It's important to give the context. Max Verstappen then runs George Russell off the road. Why? Well, because he's saying, if I had to give that place back for George Russell running me off the road, then surely let's turn this on its head. Let's do tax avoidance here. How do you like it, George Russell? And it was from Mario Kart. Lando Norris said as much, that I've seen those moves on Mario Kart. I've seen them done in the sim. This was Lando Norris in the cool down room. I get it. The world is going to rally against Max Verstappen for this. And I understand why to a certain extent. But again, you've got to give the instance its full context. Maximilian Verstappen will be fuming in that car, feeling aggrieved. I mean, and then that's what happens. Let me read out to you what people have said. Because again, remember, lest we forget, there is a steward's investigation still going on. Potentially the 10 place or the 10-second grid penalty down to P10 isn't all that she wrote here. Here's where it gets techie, because George Russell has been asked about it as GPDA, driver representative of the GPDA. And here's what he had to say. He said, I've seen those type of moves on the sim before. It felt deliberate. That's the conversation that we're having, whether Max Verstappen deliberately charged into George Russell. Because again, if past his prologue, Jerez 97, 1994, Adelaide, if past his prologue, potentially the stewards might want to give Maximilian Verstappen a harsher penalty than the 10 seconds he got. Lest we forget as well, Max Verstappen is only 4 points away from a cheeky race ban on his super license. Here's what George had to say. I want to go through this because it's important. George said, I've seen those moves on the sim before. It felt deliberate. I was a bit surprised, but we as Mercedes, the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, have other things to be concerned about. I'm too close to this situation to say whether it was categorically deliberate or incidental. As GPDA driver representative, we, says George, finished P4, he finished P10. Max is such an amazing driver, so many people look up to him around the world, but those moves very rarely work out for him. Rachel Brooks, again, when questioning the man in question, falls into the 5-time champion Maximilian Verstappen, Rachel Brooks gave it to him, asked the questions on everybody's mind. Brooks, he said, Max, you know what we have to talk about. I'm sorry to ask you these questions, but was it intentional? Max Verstappen responded instantly, matter of fact and very curt. Does it even matter? I prefer not to speak about that. I prefer to speak about the race and not one single moment. To which Brooksy responded with a follow-up question. That moment affects your hopes for the title. Max responds, if there were hopes in the first place. Maybe it was better that you stayed out, Max, and didn't come in and put on the brand new white labelled hard compound tyres. And Max says, yeah, maybe it was, but we weren't to know. Maybe I should have stayed out. Nico Rosberg said this. He goes, why even ask Maximilian Verstappen the questions? It was obvious that the incident was deliberate. What Max was doing was revenge. He was so peeved off at the circumstance, the aggrieved, the perceived injustice at Charles Leclerc bumping into him on the straight. So too George Russell bumping into him in a hard way on the back of an understeer moment at the altar of Charles Leclerc's dirty air. And then to be told by GP, the dude who's meant to be rooting for you, that you need to give back the place. Those are the rules. Maximilian Verstappen's like, what are you talking about? I've had enough now. Well, if those are the rules, then I'm going to show you how to exploit the rules. Why don't you have some of that, George Russell? Put that in your pipe and smoke it, because that's exactly what you did to me. Max is saying that that's a difference in extents, not kinds. Nico Rosberg responds as follows. And again, Nico Rosberg's reaction was telling, was it not, when GP came over and said, give back the place? Nico Rosberg, one word response, no, what are you doing? He's done nothing wrong there. You are going to enrage an already fallible now Maximilian Verstappen, who will be fuming at a perceived injustice. This is what Nico Rosberg said. It's obvious. The incident in question needs no explanation. It was 100% deliberate. It was unacceptable. Maximilian Verstappen, therefore, should be black flagged. This is the conversation that we're going to have. Therefore, if what Max did was deliberate on the back of the perceived injustice? Lest we forget it was Charles Leclerc. Anthony D says Charles Leclerc's fault. Lest we forget George Russell, 3 boxes he had to tick to pull off the overtaker to stay within the rules. Only 2 of those were ticked, understeer settings. And then you get Maximilian Verstappen responding to GP and the perceived injustice by going full Mario Kart settings. It's techier than techie things. And sadly for OJP, brilliant race again from the chap. Now the leader materially in the Drivers' Championship, but nobody will be talking about this. It will be about Maximilian Verstappen, the perceived injustice of him steering in. Again, raging against the machine. GP shouldn't have done that. I would argue that he was as big a cause, a bigger driver in that circumstance as any. It gets techier than techie things as we round third base on round 9, the Spanish Grand Prix. How do you like yourself some F1?